Hi, this is Tom Needham, and you are listening to the Sounds Podcast and Sounds of Film radio show, where we spotlight extraordinary stories and voices shaping the cultural and social landscape. On today's episode, I'm delving into the transformative world of wildlife conservation and personal empowerment with filmmaker Austin Peck, the director of the powerful new documentary Ranger. Set against the breathtaking backdrop of Kenya's homeland, Ranger tells the inspiring story of 12 courageous women who become East Africa's first all female anti poaching unit. This groundbreaking film explores their year long journey of self discovery, healing, and transformation, challenging the traditionally male dominated militarized approach to wildlife protection. Produced by Academy Award winner Roger Ross Williams, Ranger is not just a film about conservation, it's a testament to resilience, empowerment, and redefining tradition. The film is available on video on demand. Austin, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. What a film. What inspired you to tell the story of Ranger and focus on this groundbreaking anti poaching unit?
Yeah, it's really a chance to do a film love letter to a place that was transformative for me. Even I lived there about a decade before this film opportunity came my way, and it actually is set in an area where I used to live with my wife and daughter, and um, it was all kind of in my front yard in a way. The community where these rangers were recruited from, were many of them were old friends, and we'd known each other for a long time. So when this project, this initiative came about to sort of tap this new resource in women as conservation rangers, it all began very sort of in baby steps. There was a curiosity around what this is going to look like, what the training is going to look like. And then their facilitator showed up, the person who was going to train them and really initiate them, and then the whole thing took on a whole new depth. His program was really different from what we all expected, and it became much more multidimensional and was really about rite of passage and trauma more than tactical rangering. So it became very interesting for me at that point.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing there previously, before the film?
Yeah, I originally, about a decade earlier, went there to work in a hospital. Actually, I used to be in medicine in a previous life, and that was that quickly gave way to my first film in Kenya that was about kids leaving the pastoralist communities of the north and coming into the city and getting into trouble there and gangs and drugs. And it was this sort of story about urbanization happening rapidly and acutely on particular communities. But and then I started getting into more journalistic work and some human rights work as well. And I had made friends sort of across the region of northern Kenya with various conservancies, and used to work with a family-run operation called the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, who work in Tsavo National Park, rescuing elephants and rewilding them. And that was sort of my, getting my boots on the ground to understand the conservation world and making connections there. And so that was what I was up to before Ranger came along.
I'm kind of curious, why did you leave the medical field? Were you just very interested in filmmaking or the issues, or was it something in the medical field?
I always did research so that I could tell a story. It was
Uh,
really, I was lonely in the lab, and that life is it's for some and not for others. And for me, it was always about the exposition. And so, doing the sort of rigorous scientific research around brain disease or cancer, the various things that I worked on and taught, it was always about the debate and the discourse after you'd sort of hidden yourself away for a while and come back with something worthy of talking about. And like that is the framework for documentary.
yeah.
It's just much more fun as a medium. And if you bring that scientific rigor to it and the stamina, it just becomes, it was much more my bag.
Well, you really found an interesting story here. As you already mentioned, these women are unique and they went through a fascinating training program. How is this training program different from traditional military style methods that others have gone through?
The facilitator has done both. Shane is his name, and he's a central character in the film, and he was British Special Forces during the wars in the Middle East, and he was in Bosnia, and he was in Sierra Leone, and he saw all kinds of really intense conflict in his career as a soldier, and it left him in ruin, and he spent over a decade sort of healing himself, and undergoing a lot of the processes that are featured in the film around trauma release, forgiveness, and sort of staring down your demons. And, professionally, he was still useful post his years as a warrior, and he was invited to train male rangers in the Congo and elsewhere, alongside actually another fellow whose name is Damien Mander, who trained the Akashinga women, who are featured in a short film that's on National Geographic from Zimbabwe. And Damien and Shane differ in the way that they train. Damien definitely focuses on equipping women, for conflict zone situations. And in Kenya, there is a need to have that tactical rigor, but there are also conservancies that are approaching conservation in a new way, where a soft power is required, and community integration, and sort of dissolving the boundary between community and conservancy. And the people who are, it turns out, who are best equipped to do that are the women from those places. And so while there is an amount of tactical training and understanding how to survive in these tough environments where there are predators, where there are dangerous people, they need to know these things, but they also need to walk lightly and listen, and be in touch with a whole new kind of sensitivity. And I think that is where the idea to involve women was born, really, not to just have such a offensive presence, but more of a community integrated presence.
It might be obvious, but can you explain to our listeners who haven't seen the film yet what
Mm-hmm.
exactly a ranger is,
Yep.
particularly the type of ranger
Yep.
that they are?
A wildlife ranger protects an area of land that is meant to safeguard animals and flora and fauna. And in Kenya, there are a lot of encroaching forces that want wood for charcoal, that want elephants and rhino for their ivories, and that and for bushmeat, and for all trophies and things like that. And so Kenya has gone through phases of intense loss of their wildlife. 2014, 2015, the attrition was really, really shocking. And a lot of the big parks had to figure out how to deal with this before all of the elephants were gone. And a ranger is on the front line of this. The ranger is the person who is patrolling the parks in a unit, following footsteps, investigating. If there's a suspicious death of an animal, they have to figure out what happened to it. And so they're there to protect the wildlife, and they do it on foot, and sometimes with the help of air patrol or a vehicle. But for the most part, they're walking around the parks, looking and listening and investigating anything that would be abnormal. So that's what a ranger does.
And why has it taken so long for women to be allowed to be rangers here?
That's a great question. I think that really has to be looked at in a much more social structural kind of way, where employment at all has been withheld from women, particularly in the pastoralist communities, the Ma communities, the Maasai, the Samburu in Kenya. The women are supposed to stay at home. They're supposed to take care of the kids and occasionally the livestock. And it's really about a power dynamic between the women and the men. And that power dynamic, I also think, arises from which gender benefits from the ritualistic, or I should say, the rites of passage that exist in a community. and in the Maasai communities, all of the rites of passage are afforded to the men. The boys become warriors. The warriors then graduate into the age of marriage, and from there they become wase, the elders. And the women really do not have much of a life to look forward to that is, of course, the rhythm of rites of passage and how much that gives a person. They don't benefit from that. And so really, when you ask why are the women left out of rangering, it's the deeper question is why are they left out of the other building blocks of their society, and they're relegated to the home. And so I think that's really the answer.
The concentration in the film on the rite of passage issue was really an interesting way to go about telling the story. Do you think rite of passage is important in, let's say, in America as much?
Oh gosh, yes. I personally feel the need for it. When I watch this film, it makes me so emotional because I want for myself and for the people that I know and love to be able to go through their life, receiving all of the energy from the community and telling you who you are, reinforcing values, and then going through your maturation with these landmark moments. And in the U.S., I struggle to really point out in our culture, in our incredibly diverse and rich culture, what those rites of passage are. And for anyone listening to this, I would encourage them. And I think this is the big question that you take away from this movie is like, what do I have like these women have in my own life? And that's what I want people to examine. And they have had a very central rite of passage taken away from them. And it's a very controversial one. Female circumcision is what they used to have. And it was what brought a girl into the age of marriage. And it was brutal and devastating to each person. Yet it was still a core tenet to the rite of passage in their society. And so when that was outlawed, and that's not to say it doesn't still happen, it does, but it happens secretly and it happens without community love and support. It happens in darkness. And so you're left with the worst aspects of this damaging rite of passage, and without any of the other side that the boys really benefit from. The boys, when they're initiated, they're the focus of their whole community for a couple of months, every single day. There's prayer. There are little missions that they go on to find particular tree branches to make arrows. There's special milk that they bathe in and that they consume, and there's blood, and it's incredible. Their whole life takes on total purpose during that time. And the women are left out of that completely.
I know it's touched on in the film, but can you share with our listeners a little bit about how some of the men that you encountered are reacting to this new group of women rangers?
Yeah, there's a real spectrum there. Some of them who understand how important it is for anyone in their community to have a job were very supportive. Income was good. If the men there also struggle to find employment, they're really in this sort of marginal era, and also geography in Kenya. They're not in the urban area and they're not totally in the bush. This community is kind of within view of both. And so there were some men that were just appreciative of the chance for anyone in their family to be earning a living. And then there were others more old school who were really resentful, suspicious, and like would just sort of mock these women for taking themselves so seriously in this pretend job that, they would just really diminish them. And, but there are other men that I think are from a different generation, who thought to themselves like, hey, I support this, I welcome this. And the real telltale has been since they were integrated into, out of the film really focuses on their initiation and their training. And it ends before they really take on the job. That would be this whole different sequel kind of thing. And some men accept them in the units and some just did not. And there were superior officers that, gave the women the worst jobs. And this trend of employing women as rangers spread to other neighboring communities, and so this experiment has kind of grown into the region and actually throughout Africa. And so different groups of women are being given the jobs that they deserve and others are not. And so it's really a time of transformation. And this was not, a magic bullet that just changed society forever. Like it's incremental.
Why do you refer to them as not that it's your opinion, but as
Hmm.
pretend jobs? Why do some
Oh,
people call them pretend jobs?
because they think those men that was sort of a that was an attitude held by men in those communities that said, oh, these women are here ornamentally, that if push came to shove, that they wouldn't be up to the real demands of rangering. If the area slipped into tribal conflict again, or if there were ever very, very serious incursions around poaching or some of the organized crime that happens around Kenya, they just doubted that the women will be up to it. And part of that actually comes from the fact that in Kenya, it's very difficult for women to receive weapons training. And that's another sort of that's another barrier that is now being overcome. When this film was made, it was still, I don't believe it was even legal for women outside of the national military to be licensed to carry rifles in the parks. So that the men had the guns, the women didn't have the guns. Therefore,
Oh,
there was this huge power imbalance, right? And so they didn't understand. Those who were criticizing these women didn't understand the power that the women brought to the job
mm.
around intelligence gathering and changing people's perspectives around conservation. That other kind of power, yeah.
Was it extra dangerous for them not having weapons in terms of what they
Well,
might encounter?
it depends. In some conservancies, there you have to be armed. In Tsavo National Park, for instance, in Kenya, uh, the incursions for poaching were so frequent and they were so well armed. I mean, there were people landing helicopters, with machine guns, basically taking ivory out 10 years ago. And there's no chance in stopping that if you're not armed yourself. But in northern Kenya, it's different. It's a slow kind of creeping loss of wildlife up there. That's really more about changing perspectives in the surrounding communities to initiate everyone in the community as a steward of that critical environment. So in some situations, you could definitely make the argument that it takes, you got to fight fire with fire. But in others, in the long view, that's not a sustainable way. Like we're
Mm.
we're not winning that fight. Guns are not winning that fight.
Wow. So, besides being about women, it does teach you some stuff about poaching and conservation. What was some of the
Mm.
biggest things that you learned in making this film about what's going on over there?
Hmm. Um, I had to in this area. I'd once worked in other national parks in Kenya and in the Congo and other places where it really was kind of a frontline military conflict. There were rebel groups, there are organized crime, all of that. But in working in Laikipia County in Kenya, it's a much more fluid and human and social balance that needs to be struck in order to safeguard those environments. It's not about stopping a foreign bad guy from coming in there and robbing the place of its elephants. It's really about, like I was saying, dissolving the barrier between what is a conservancy and what is community land. And Laikipia is a really fascinating petri dish for this because it's a composite of many different conservancies. All of them have a different ideology on how to safeguard their land. And the communities are woven all throughout conservancies up there. So in those conservancies are either protectors or people who are desperate enough to hunt or to burn down the forests. And so it's really a look into the future of conservation, like Laikipia County. And I think doing this through the eyes of women in these communities was super fascinating. You weren't looking through the sight on the top of a rifle. You were looking eye to eye between these women and their uncles and then their fathers and then their brothers and the aunties. So I think it's actually a peek into what conservation has to be.
And how is the conservation movement right now? Are we winning? Are we losing in terms of preserving the
Mm,
land? In terms of saving the animals?
that's a tough question it's like predicting an election or something. I think it's funny. It goes hand in hand with that. I think there are countries that want their moment to industrialize, and they've seen other countries go through these incredibly uh, profitable eras, even a century. And there are countries who would be on the forefront of conservation, but there are people in power in those places who believe that nope, this is our moment to industrialize. We're tired of living in their so-called dark ages. Ethiopia, for example, wants to dam up various rivers for hydroelectric projects. Damming those rivers is going to devastate entire regions of East Africa. Examples like that, and I think in Kenya it goes through phases as well. And under the previous regime, the regime of Uhuru Kenyatta, the former president, um, they wanted to double down on tourism and attracting the world to their incredible theater of wildlife. And under the current administration of William Ruto, it's not known whether or not that's a priority for him. And so I think it depends on economics. Um, in each country, and whether or not they decide that their natural resources are profitable for them. And the answer to their many of these are democracies that answer to their voters, and they need to create jobs. And so they're I'm really expanding here. It's hard to sort of wrap all of that into an answer, but
Yeah,
um, I don't know if we're winning. I don't know if we're winning.
it sounds challenging, but you do
Yep.
have these women, and their story is really
Mm.
inspiring. And I was wondering, we kind of have to wrap this up, but I was wondering if you
Yep.
just can give our listeners a sense of the incredible journey that they're going to see in your film of these
Yeah.
women and what they went through to achieve
Mm.
their goals.
Mm. Well, our main characters arrive in the film unsure of themselves, not knowing truly what they're capable of, never having really been given a chance to prove themselves in a way that they really desperately wanted to. And through what happens in the film is a very special moment for all of them, because they're allowed to sequester away from their communities and just live together as 12 women in a barrack, basically, and be with each other and wake up at dawn and um, eat well and meditate and exercise and learn and go through incredibly intense emotional processes, role playing exercises, and facing their fears in a very safe and encouraging environment. And so I think audiences will see very quickly the power of this process, and hopefully just imagine themselves in their shoes and transcend the fact that it's in this faraway place for many of the people that will watch this, and look into their own lives about what from Ranger and what from this training regimen that they went to can they access in our own lives. And so it's a very intimate movie, and it's hard to talk about it as a conservation film or about anti-poaching and all of this, because a lot of it takes place with very up close cinematography as people are going down very deep into their own emotions. It's a very emotional film, intimate and up close. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that's the focus of it.
Well, it's a beautiful looking film,
Mm,
and it
thank
is
you.
very emotional. And somehow you were able to bring all these different ideas and these stories together, and just an incredible movie. I want to highly recommend it. Austin, if people want to learn more about
Hmm.
your film, Ranger,
Hmm.
where can they
Hmm.
go online?
Rangerfilm.com, and at Rangerfilm on Instagram. Those would be the two best places to stay in touch. Yeah.
And if they want to see the movie, how can they see it?
Yep. In the U.S., they can currently see it. The international distribution is pending, but right now it's on Apple TV. You can just access it through the store there for purchase for rent. Amazon Prime Video, Google Play, and a bunch of the other video on demand platforms, the YouTube, Vimeo. But I think the main two that folks will be familiar with are probably Apple and Prime Video. Yeah.
Awesome film. Thank you so much, Austin.
Thank you so much for your time and for your interest.
Yeah. Highly recommend it. Everyone go out and see Ranger. Take it easy.
Take it easy.